Someone just said something about Shedeur Sanders that the entire NFL might not be ready to hear. And no, this wasn't some random hot take designed to go viral. This came from a voice that actually understands what greatness looks like at the highest level. The claim that Shedeur Sanders isn't chasing guys like Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson. He might already be ahead of them in the one area that matters most. Now think about how wild that sounds for a second. You're talking about two of the most dominant quarterbacks in the league today, players who can take over games with pure athleticism, who can break defenses with their legs, who can do things most quarterbacks physically can't. And yet this argument isn't about speed, it's not about arm strength, it's not about highlight plays. It's about something most people don't even notice when they watch the game. The mental side. Because while everyone is focused on what quarterbacks can do physically, there's a growing belief that Shedeur operates on a completely different level when it comes to reading defenses, making decisions, and controlling the game before the ball is even snapped. And if that's true, then this conversation changes completely. Because history has shown us something very clear: when the game slows down for a quarterback mentally, everything else becomes easier. The throws get cleaner, the mistakes disappear, the big moments don't feel big anymore. That's what separates good quarterbacks from the ones who actually take over the league. But here, where things get even more interesting. This isn't just coming from fans or hype-driven media. This idea is being backed by people who have spent their entire lives studying the game, people who know exactly what they're looking at. And once you hear the full breakdown of why they believe this, you might start to see Shedeur Sanders in a completely different way. Hear what most people are completely missing about Shedeur Sanders, and it's the exact reason this conversation is getting so heated. Because when fans compare quarterbacks, they usually look at the obvious things first: arm strength, speed, highlight plays, the stuff that jumps off the screen. And yeah, guys like Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson dominate in those areas. There's no debate there. They're physical freaks who can take over a game in seconds. But that's not what this argument is about. This is about what happens before the play even starts. And that's where, according to Emmitt Smith, Shedeur is operating on a completely different level. We are talking about pre-snap reads, defensive recognition, understanding leverage, identifying mismatches before the defense even finishes disguising what they're doing. That's not flashy, but it's everything. Because at the highest level of football, the difference between a good quarterback and a great one isn't how far you can throw or how fast you can run. It's how fast you can process. And reports, film breakdowns, and even former players suggest that Shedeur processes the game fast, like already playing chess while everyone else is still reacting type of fast. He's not waiting to see what the defense does. He's predicting it. And that changes everything. Because once a quarterback starts controlling the defense instead of reacting to it, the entire game shifts in his favor. Windows open earlier, pressure feels slower, decisions become automatic. That's why some people believe this isn't about potential anymore. It's about what he's already showing right now. Now, to be clear, this doesn't mean he's better overall than those elite names yet. That's where the debate gets exaggerated. But what it does mean is that in one of the most important areas of quarterback play, the mental side, he might already be ahead of where most young quarterbacks ever get. And that's what makes this so dangerous. Because physical tools can take you far. But mental mastery, that's what sustains greatness. And if Shedeur is already this advanced in that area, then this conversation isn't crazy anymore. It's just uncomfortable for people who haven't caught up yet. Now, on the surface, this take sounds completely insane. Saying Shedeur Sanders is operating ahead of guys like Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson. That's the kind of statement that instantly gets people laughing, arguing, and calling it disrespectful. And honestly, that reaction makes sense. Because when you think about those two names, you think dominance, MVP-level performances, game-breaking athleticism, the ability to take over a game in ways that feel almost unfair. So yeah, comparing a young quarterback to that level sounds like a stretch. But here, where the conversation starts to flip. Because this isn't about who's more explosive. It's about how quarterbacks actually win when everything is on the line. Think about the biggest moments in football, late in the fourth quarter, playoff pressure, cold weather, defenses that have studied every tendency you have and are ready for everything you want to do. In those moments, athleticism alone doesn't save you. Decision-making does. And that's where the comparison starts to make more sense. Look at Patrick Mahomes. He's not the fastest quarterback, he's not the strongest runner, but somehow, when the pressure hits, he always finds the answer. Why? Because he processes faster than everyone else on the field. He sees things before they happen. And that's exactly the type of trait people are starting to notice in Shedeur. It's not about scrambling for 40 yards or launching the ball 70 yards downfield. It's about knowing exactly where to go with the ball instantly. Getting through progressions before the defense can react. Making the right decision over and over again, even when everything is collapsing around you. And here's the key part that's making this take less crazy over time. Those traits don't always show up in highlights. They show up in consistency. They show up in accuracy. They show up in the small decisions that keep drives alive and games under control. So while the flashy plays might still belong to guys like Allen and Lamar, there's a growing belief that the foundation of elite quarterback play, the mental control of the game, is already something Shedeur is tapping into at a very high level. And if that continues to develop, then this conversation won't sound outrageous for much longer. It'll just sound early. But here, where things start to get messy, because the story around Shedeur Sanders hasn't just been about football. It's been about narrative. And depending on where you look, that narrative feels completely different from what's actually happening on the field. Because if you listen to certain media voices, the conversation suddenly shifts. It's no longer about decision-making or accuracy. It becomes about measurables, arm strength, mobility, whether he fits a very specific mold of what a modern quarterback is supposed to look like. And that shift, it didn't happen by accident. It's been said that once Shedeur started showing flashes of high-level play, the standards quietly changed. The same traits that get praised in other quarterbacks suddenly became not enough in his case. Now, to be fair, media debates are part of the game. Every young quarterback gets scrutinized. That's normal. But what's making this situation stand out is how inconsistent the conversation feels. Because when players like Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson struggle early in their careers, the focus is usually on development, growth, potential. With Shedeur, it felt different. More immediate judgment, less patience, more focus on what he doesn't have instead of what he clearly does. And fans have started to notice. There's been a lot of discussion online suggesting that the expectations around him have been unusually specific, almost like the goalposts keep moving depending on what he shows. If he plays smart, it's not flashy enough. If he avoids mistakes, it's too safe. If he makes tight window throws, it's we need to see more. At some point, it stops feeling like evaluation and starts feeling like a narrative trying to stick. But here's the problem with that. Narratives don't hold up when the film tells a different story. Because when you actually watch what he's doing, how quickly he processes, how consistently he delivers accurate throws, how controlled he looks under pressure, it becomes harder to match that with the criticism. And that's where the disconnect really shows. Because one side is talking about perception. The other side is backed by what's actually happening on the field. And when those two don't line up, eventually something has to give. But here what makes this even more interesting. Once you move past the noise and actually look at the numbers behind his performance, the entire conversation starts to change again. Now here, where the entire conversation starts to shift, because once you look at the numbers, a lot of those narratives start falling apart. And we're not talking about cherry-picked stats or meaningless metrics. We are talking about the kind of numbers that actually reflect how a quarterback is performing snap after snap. Because quietly, while all the debates were happening, Shedeur Sanders has been putting up efficiency numbers that don't match the criticism at all. Completion percentage, accuracy, ball placement. These are the foundations of quarterback play, and according to reports and analysis, Shedeur has been right near the top among rookies in those categories. Now think about that for a second. A young quarterback in a system that wasn't exactly built around him, on a roster that's still finding its identity, and he's still delivering the ball at a high level consistently. That's not normal. That's not something you just brush off. But here, where it gets interesting, those numbers haven't been the focus of the conversation. Instead, the spotlight keeps shifting to things like team record, surrounding talent, or situations that are clearly bigger than one player. And that's where the disconnect becomes obvious. Because when a rookie quarterback is operating with that level of accuracy in a less-than-perfect environment, it usually signals something important. It means he's doing his job. And maybe even more than that. There's been a lot of discussion suggesting that if you put those same numbers on a more stable team, one with better protection, more consistent play calling, and stronger support around him, the perception would look completely different. And honestly, that's not a stretch. Because context matters. Stats without context can be misleading, but in this case, the context actually makes those numbers more impressive, not less. That's what people are starting to realize. Because it's one thing to put up clean stats in a perfect situation. It's another thing to stay efficient when things around you aren't always going right. And that's what makes this so hard to ignore. Because now the question isn't whether he's capable. It's whether people are willing to acknowledge what's already happening. And once you pair those numbers with what shows up on film, that's when the argument stops being debatable and starts becoming undeniable. But stats only tell part of the story. Because when you actually turn on the film, that's where things start getting really hard to argue against. And this is where Shedeur Sanders separates himself in a way that doesn't always show up in headlines. It's not about one crazy highlight. It's about consistency. Snap after snap, you start to notice the same pattern: quick reads, controlled movement, and decisions that feel ahead of the defense. And that's not something you fake. There are moments on tape where defenses are clearly trying to disguise coverage, rotating late, showing one look before the snap, and shifting into another. That's the kind of thing that confuses most young quarterbacks. But with Shedeur, you see him recognize it almost instantly. You see him identify where the leverage is, where the mismatch is forming, and then deliver the ball without hesitation. That's advanced. There was a throw, fans have been talking about it, where he dropped a pass perfectly over the top on a wheel route. Not just completed it, placed it. The kind of touch and timing that only shows up when a quarterback fully understands what he's seeing. And then there are the tighter throws. Back shoulder placements, timing routes, balls delivered before the receiver even turns his head. Those aren't just throws. Those are decisions made early. Because by the time the defense reacts, it's already too late. And that's the theme you keep seeing. He's not reacting to the defense. He's beating it. Even when pressure starts to close in, there's no panic, no wasted movement. He moves within the pocket just enough, resets, and gets the ball out. Quick, efficient, on time. That's what stands out more than anything. Because a lot of quarterbacks can make plays when things are perfect. But when the pocket starts collapsing, when the coverage tightens, when everything speeds up, that's when the real difference shows. And right now, the film suggests that Shedeur isn't speeding up with the chaos. He's staying in control of it. And that's the kind of trait that doesn't just translate to the NFL. It scales. Because if he's already showing this level of processing, timing, and control this early, then what happens when the game slows down even more for him? That's the question people are starting to ask. And once you've seen the film, it's not an easy question to dismiss anymore. But if you really want to understand what's happening here, don't just watch the film. Watch the organization. Because sometimes teams tell you exactly what they're thinking, just not with words. And right now, everything the Cleveland Browns are doing points straight at Shedeur Sanders. Not officially, not publicly, but clearly. Start with the small things that most people overlook. The social media posts, the highlight packages, the way the team chooses to present certain players compared to others. It's been said that during key moments, training camp, off-season updates, even routine content drops, the Browns consistently put the spotlight on Shedeur. Not the other quarterbacks. Not the veterans. Him. Now on the surface, that might not seem like a big deal. But in the NFL, that's intentional. Because organizations don't accidentally build their public image around a player they don't believe in. Every post, every graphic, every piece of content is approved with a purpose. And that purpose usually points toward the future. Then there's the moment that really stood out, the jersey number switch. When Shedeur changed his number back to 2, the Browns didn't treat it like a minor update. They turned it into a moment. A full production, a story, a statement. And teams don't do that for backup quarterbacks. They don't invest that kind of attention into someone they see as temporary. They do it for players they're preparing fans to believe in. Franchise-type players. And once you start looking at it through that lens, everything feels different. Because it's not just marketing. It's messaging. It's the organization quietly telling you, this is our guy, without stepping up to a podium and saying it directly. Now, to be fair, none of this is official. There's no press release confirming anything. And until games are played, there's always room for things to change. But patterns don't lie. And when every signal, from content to presentation to internal energy, keeps pointing in the same direction, it becomes harder to ignore. Because teams don't operate randomly. They move with intention. And right now, the Browns are moving like a team that already knows who their quarterback is going to be. Which raises a bigger question. If the organization already knows, how long until everyone else catches up? But here, where everything stops being speculation and starts becoming reality. Because you can question media narratives, you can debate stats, you can even argue about film. But there's one thing in the NFL you can't fake. The locker room. And right now, everything coming out of Cleveland suggests that locker room has already made its choice. Shedeur Sanders. You can feel it in the way teammates talk about him, not forced, not scripted, just natural respect. And that matters more than anything else. Because players don't care about headlines, they don't care about narratives, they care about one thing: who they trust when the game is on the line. And it's been said that Shedeur has been building that trust quietly, day by day. Showing up, putting in the work, staying in the building when nobody's watching. That's how respect is earned in this league. Not with words, but with consistency. And then you have voices like Myles Garrett. This isn't just any teammate. This is one of the most respected players in the entire league, a leader, a presence. And when someone like that shows belief in a young quarterback, people listen. Because guys like Myles don't hand out praise easily. That kind of support has to be earned. And it tells you everything about how Shedeur is viewed inside that building. It's not just acceptance, it's belief. And once that belief spreads through a locker room, something powerful happens. The energy shifts. The team starts to rally around one voice. And suddenly, it's not about who might be the quarterback anymore. It's about who is the quarterback. Now, to be fair, nothing is official yet. Training camp still matters, reps still matter, performance still matters. But here's the reality. When a locker room reaches this point, it's incredibly hard to reverse. Because now, you're not just competing against another player. You're competing against momentum, against trust, against belief. And those are things you can't just take away overnight. Which is why this situation feels different. Because this isn't a battle that's still wide open. It's one that's already leaning heavily in one direction. And if everything continues the way it's going, it won't be long before that direction becomes official. So when you put everything together, the film, the numbers, the locker room energy, and even the way the organization is moving, it starts to feel like this was never really a debate at all. It just looked like one from the outside. Because while people were arguing, questioning, and waiting for proof, something much quieter was happening behind the scenes. Alignment. And at the center of it all is Shedeur Sanders. The coaching staff is leaning toward him. The front office is building around him. The locker room is rallying behind him, and the performance, both statistically and on film, is backing it all up. That's not coincidence. That's direction. Because in the NFL, when all those pieces start pointing the same way at the same time, it usually means the decision has already been made, just not announced yet. And that's what makes this situation so different. This isn't a dramatic competition where one player suddenly pulls ahead. This is a slow shift, a quiet takeover, the kind that happens before most people even realize it's happening. And by the time it becomes official, it doesn't feel surprising. It feels inevitable. Now, does that mean everything is guaranteed? No. There's still a season to play. There are still challenges ahead. Defenses will adjust, pressure will rise, and every young quarterback has to prove it when the lights get brightest. But here's the part that should stand out. He's already built the hardest part. The trust, the belief, the foundation. And those are things you can't fake, and you definitely can't build overnight. Which is why this feels bigger than just a starting job. It feels like the beginning of something. Because if Shedeur Sanders is already seeing the game at this level, if he's already earned this kind of respect, if the organization is already moving like this, then the rest of the league might be looking at this completely wrong. This isn't about whether he can become the guy. It's about how long it takes before everyone accepts that he already is. And by the time that realization hits, it might already be too late to stop it.